Hey guys, welcome to the OnReviewCast, and today on review we're going to be taking a look at Interview with a Vampire, episode 4. On review.
AMC series, Interview with a Vampire, Season 1, Episode 4.
Episode composition courtesy of Fandom. Title, The Ruthless Pursuit of Blood with All a Child's Demanding. Writers for this one is Eleanor Burgess and director Keith Powell. Air date October 23rd, 2022. Synopsis. In his penthouse, Louis gives Malloy access to Claudia's diaries, which offer a fresh and contemptuous account of the creation of the young fledgling vampire and how her vampire guardians adjust to their new family tree. So, yeah, this episode was, gotta say, I think this one is definitely a stronger one for sure. I'm feeling that. I think personally I enjoyed it, guys. It's definitely as encouraged as always. Let us know what you guys think below in the comments and all this other stuff. But I think that this one was a good one. It's something that, if I'm being honest, an idea that it's based off of the idea that was thought of, I guess, like in the whole vampire lore, in terms of like vampirism. It's an idea that's like thought of as like, you know, a what if scenario basically. Cause like before we even jump into this, let's think about like what the synopsis basically gave us was kind of like, you know, how Claudia deals with the new dynamics of living and becoming a vampire. So we've seen in the other previous episodes, previous 2 episodes, we've seen how Louis had his transition and how he struggled and how he went about being a vampire and etc. And how he his interactions and his workings with Lestat. And we got to see that from a perspective of a man, of an adult man becoming this, you know, monster thing, this new being, just transitioning into something else. And that was definitely hard enough. But now we get to see it from a different perspective, in that of Claudia, a child in this episode. Very interesting take, very interesting way of particularly doing a story or telling a story, because again, from the perspective, we've all seen and heard Louis' voice throughout this entire venture. We've been listening to Louis narrate and Louis be basically interviewed and direct the story through Daniel Malloy. But this perspective, this episode, we take a look into Claudia's perspective. And the way we get Claudia's perspective is through these diaries that Daniel Malloy basically has. And I think that that's actually pretty friggin' cool. That's such a different way of like telling a story within a story, kind of like, because we got to see like what we finally get to see a different perspective other than Louis. I remember in previous episodes, I was kind of hinting at, kind of saying that, like, you know, make sure we got to maybe take this with a little bit of grain of salt to some certain degree, because Louis telling the story, and this is like more than like what, a century ago or so. You know, this is like from their perspective from the story. And I just thought that this episode, that idea on its own started this episode off strong. It started it on the right foot, in my opinion. And yeah, so what happens in the episode, let's just review it a bit, is that Claudia is the child that, picking up right from the last episode, you know, Louis is having some problems with an interpersonal relationship with humans, and the fire breaks out, and he hears a child screaming in the building, and he goes to save her, and he brings her basically home. And what happens is that after he brings her back to Lestat's place, he basically begs Lestat to, like, you know, make her into a vampire to save her life, to make sure that she basically doesn't die. Now, here's the thing. If I'm being honest, I don't think that she would have died. Maybe. I mean, her burn. Well, she might have. But it's curious to think about because, like, I guess in that moment, Louis saw that this girl was hurt, and she probably thought she was gonna die. I mean, I guess with the vampiring, he could probably assume that like her heart's slowing down, but it didn't really seem that like she could possibly maybe lose her life. I mean, I guess if a person gets burned up enough, like definitely, like I'm not a doctor, but definitely the chances of them dying is probably higher than someone that's not burned. But yeah, so after begging with Lestat to basically turn this girl, Lestat eventually goes ahead and he does it. He does give her the gift of vampirism and transforms her into this thing. Now, I mean, watching this on review, I know the story, but again, going back to the idea of a child becoming a vampire, I mean, again, I at first glance, and on second watching it, you think that, yeah, this idea is actually pretty cool and pretty interesting. But what really it is it really, and I talk about the gift of vampirism. Was that really a gift? I mean, we found out later, and we'll get to this a little bit later on in the episode, but I'm kind of addressing it a little bit now, is that Claudia is gonna be a child forever. She's gonna be a forever child. That's a Twilight thing. Yeah, I know. But I'm kind of like the vampire nerd. Like I've seen a lot of vampire like stories, like I've talked before, Angel, Buffy, even the dreaded Twilight. It's dreaded because I make fun of it, and it's honestly the rules of it are completely fucking stupid. But nonetheless, I've seen it just to, say that like, oh, you can't give a perspective on it because you never seen it. No, dude, like I've seen it. I've seen the Twilight. It sucks. Anyway, vampire child, that concept, that idea, it is a curse, essentially. I mean, I think that's what it is. It's, you're going to be a child forever. You never get to experience things or live any kind of adult life. And if you really think about it, like that's actually really sad. Like you never get to drive a car, or maybe like learn to drive a car. You never get to know what alcohol is like, and the perspective of other people too, if you think about it on a psychological level, is that they will always perceive you as a child. They will always see you as a child. I mean, in the story, and apparently also there's a book for this, like that's actually pretty cool. But in the story, Claudia apparently is like the 18, 19 years old, I guess when she's turned. But I mean, that's still awfully young. That's still very close to being a child and being for a vampire. I think probably a good age to be turned, if there was any good age to be turned into a vampire, they're probably like 25, 26. You're not too young, you're not too old, but you're definitely right around the age that you probably need to be to take care of yourself and essentially know who you are as a person. You're developed and mature enough to understand the ways of the world and yourself and the way you work about it, and you've experienced enough at that point, I feel like. But yeah, so Claudia, after being turned into a vampire and essentially being orphaned, they find out that she doesn't really have any other family to go about. They essentially adopt her, quote unquote adopt her, and it's like they're this sweet, loving, killing family. That's a family of vampires, as essentially what it is. And as a child, they show the perspective. I think that again, this idea of like her just showing the perspective of Claudia was so cool, because as that experiencing that as the audience, they show like how a child normally is. Children are rebellious, they're curious, they're loud, they're annoying, and they exemplify these traits well within the confines of this supernatural story. I do feel like they do, and it's pretty apparent throughout the story, and it's just very, what's the word? It's very domestic. How she's like, again, at the first time when they're trying to like get her to like murder someone, they're trying to get her to murder a drunk off the street. She's rebellious, and she's kind of like, no, I don't know if I want to kill this guy. And like, she looks back at them. She's like, and Lestat and Louis are kind of like, okay, well, get back in the car. Come on, let's go. We'll find something else. And she vamps off, or does the super speed vamp thing off, to go find a police officer instead. And instead of, and I guess they would have had this talk with her before to say, like, maybe we don't eat cops or people who wouldn't notice, draw too much attention to them. She goes off and eats this police officer. She just goes off to murder this police officer. And before Louis and Lestat can essentially catch up to her, she murders him. And just like the opposing, parental, just like the opposing parental guardianship of, two parents, we have Louis, one approving and one disapproving parent. Clear signs of a relationship that is not basically stable, but they did two different perspectives on what Claudia was doing, murdering, that police officer. Was it just, or was it just in her nature, or, but at the end of the day, they both kind of somewhat agreed that the cop was a bad kill. And again, another domestic moment when she's like right after that, she's kind of like, I'm so hungry. Is this how, it's like, again, like, children are so hyperbolic. I'm so hungry. Why am I so hungry? I'm still hungry. And then Louis like, you just ate a whole man twice your size. And you just ate a whole man twice your size. And Claudia's like, I'm still hungry though. I was like, God, I'm hungry. Is this how vampires die? Starvation. Starvation. Oh man. Just that to come along with the accent, very, very funny to me. But yeah, it's a very domesticated moment of showing how much of a child essentially Claudia is. And you gotta think that, like, again, she is a vampire now. She might potentially be this way forever. It might just be this way forever for her. It might just be this way for a really, really long time. Well, for eternity, it's essentially going to be this way for an eternity, as, to the way that maybe she's going to be acting. We don't know. At this point, we don't know. Yes, eventually, in the story, they explain that, yes, like, her mind is aging, but her body is essentially staying the same. But like from a different perspective, you could actually possibly think of, like, what if her mind didn't change, and that chemical, because her body isn't really changing. I guess it depends on how vampirism works, or the rules of which vampirism works. In this world, clearly her mind, as we find out later on, her mind ages and her mind still develops, but her body basically stays the same. And I think that that's actually interesting. But another perspective is, like, what if her mind was still that of a child? It didn't really mature, and it stayed in that childlike mindset. Like, again, that could be, if you think about it, that could be just another, like, living hell. You never really get to understand, because, like, most of the kids are like jerks, dude. Or like, if you're like even if you're like a teenager, 18, 19, some assholes out there that just don't really know how to be a person, because they've never really experienced adulthood, or what it's like to consider other people's shoes. And it's all sad to some degree. But anyway, so eventually they keep trying to make this work between the three of them and try to be a happy family. And we still look at it from the perspective of Claudia. And for the most part, it's going well. It seems to be going well anyway. And she's starting to become more and more curious, like I talked about before, about her nature as to, I guess, more or less like Lestat's like nature and his origins. She starts acting and planting the seed for asking so many questions about that. And again, what's interesting about this, we get to see, okay, like Louis and Lestat, they've been in love. But through the episodes, we've seen that Louis and Lestat have had their problems, right? What's interesting about Claudia is that she provides a perspective outside of that particular relationship. And if you think about it, or if you've ever been in love, or if you've ever been in a relationship, sometimes, we're all guilty of this, sometimes if you're with the wrong person, or you're so in love will blind you. You won't be able to necessarily see how certain things are negatively impacting your life because you're essentially in love with this person, or you've convinced yourself in a way that you're in love with this person. And I think that that's what Claudia basically provides as well, which is it basically provides a kind of like a third-party voice to seeing potentially the stats like nature of maybe not being so forthcoming with Louis because he might have been so blind to certain things right off the bat. But yeah, so and I think she makes kind of like mention of this, how like Lestat's a bit weird because she's not in love with Lestat. She can ask questions, and she asks questions and things that don't make necessarily sense. Doesn't necessarily make sense. She wouldn't necessarily brush off as like, oh, I'm in love with this dude, or I'm in love with this person. Instead, she can say, well, wait a minute, like that doesn't make any sense. Like the kind of questions that she was asking about, well, who made you? Who's your maker? You made us. We were human once, and you made us into vampires. Who originally kind of like made you? And him constantly dodging those kind of questions and any other questions that relate to maybe like his past and etc. He dances around these questions, like I said, and he evades them. And she kind of brings up the fact that like, hey, like he's been evading them, like something doesn't seem exactly quite right. And we also get to see a moment between Louis and Claudia where, I guess I don't have any children of my own, but, I guess he can, but I guess this is something that, I've had, my parents basically do this with me where they can feel vulnerable and open up to certain things about certain particular topics that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable other people feeling open and honest about opening up with. His whole conversation with Claudia about how Lestat goes off to commit murders or feedings or what have you, without him around because he can get extravagant, as he says it, as Louis puts it. That is him being vulnerable with his daughter enough to say that, hey, your uncle and I, your father, two dads, are not necessarily, always in agreement of certain things. We're not always on the same page, and we don't always have the same ideologies of how to go about being a vampire. We established that long ago from like episodes 1 through 3, honestly, but we established that way long ago. And we have Daniel Malloy. It's interesting that happened in this episode. We got to see Daniel take a look into, ask questions to Reid about him being a servant of Louis, and we catch him praying to Allah, or having some kind of like ritual prayer in the background while Daniel is essentially reading Claudia's diary. And what happens is we have, and I want to know if you guys had caught this, we had seen a Word document he pulls up on his computer after having a quick chat with Reid in the present day. And the document reads: pilot, co-pilot, attendant, do they know they work for a vampire? And then it says security details. It's like bullet pointed. So second bullet point is security details. 3 cars for a little old me. And then it says NDA. How do these arrangements work? How much money? And I'm guessing that these are just the notes essentially these are just essentially the notes that Daniel's been taking to create his article or his interview or whatever, what have you, for the paper or whatever it is that he's writing while interviewing Louis and being in his presence. And then it goes on to say, bullet point, Reid. Reference to Louis always Mr. Dupont du Lac. Right. And then they said, I serve, and then it says, and the next bullet point says, I serve a God, it's my honor. Next bullet point says, makes martini like he works at Duke's. Electronic box, mail. Does Louis enforce this kind of language? Why? And what is his end game is the next thing I think he was putting in. So he's making a document that essentially questioning all of the things that essentially he's been wondering about since he's been there interviewing Louis and interviewing his story and getting his story, all the question things, all the things that basically don't add up, and things that we might be wondering as the viewers actually too. How is Louis still so rich? How is Louis? How is he being able to held on to his wealth for so long? And do they know that many people around him knows that he's a vampire? And I can only assume that they do know because, and how does an NDA work with a vampire? But again, going back to I only could assume that they do know that they work for a vampire because the scene where he brings out the fitness trainer or that very fit guy that had excellent blood apparently. I assume they only can. Well, I guess maybe if Louis was using some kind of vampire magic trick on them to make them think it was something else that was basically going on. They didn't necessarily see what they actually are seeing. That could possibly be it too. Louis could now be that powerful enough to, do some crazy vampire tricks on, the entire staff that works for him. Kind of like how Lestat did it back in episode 2 with the boys, the army guys, and he commanded everybody to essentially get out of his house. And Louis was having a bit of a fit. But yeah, something interesting that also has actually happened in this episode too, though. We got to see Mama Dulac. Mama Dulac. We got to see Mama Dulac dead in a coffin. She passed away. So he went to go check up on his family, and he got a call from, I guess, essentially maybe the morgue coroner, whoever, or whatever have you, to let him know that, hey, I guess, this person is now passed. And he runs into his sister, who he hadn't seen since he kicked the shit out of that door in the last episode. Holy fuck. Yeah, like that. That scene was still amazing, still buried in my head. And Louis reminds his sisters, like, don't forget what I did to that door. And the reason that he has to remind her about it is because we get to see some bigotry shit happen where, just because they're two gay guys in love in Louisiana, should it be right that you two are raising a little girl? And that's a comment that she gives. I'm just like, wow. I mean, like, I know it was the height of racism back then. It was a height of bigotry back then. But just, I don't know. I guess the hair is just still, you know. Let me know if you guys agree. It's just still the hair. It's just yuck. But again, let me know if you guys agree. Correspond with us in the comments. Let us know. But yeah, over the fact that. This guy, what did she call him? Yeah, it's this time. We went from a level of French white. Remember that in the first episode, we went from a level of French white back up to now we've graduated from French white. We've gone to white daddy. So it went from French white to white daddy. You and your white daddy are doing fine. Just right. What she said? You and your white daddy are doing fine right in the corner. You doing quite fine, y'all. Because what happened was she was trying to essentially buy the house, and Louis was kind of just like not really there for that. He was there for the essentially the wake, and not there for the bigotry, and not there for any of that really. But yeah, despite that, Louis agrees to, send the papers over in the morning or through the mail, and so he could just put that life behind it. I saw that as a way of him, he's over it, he wants to move forward now. And we cut to the next scene where Lestat and Claudia are essentially hunting together, and it's something as a rarity. We ever see Lestat and Claudia essentially are together in any kind of capacity, I guess, in any kind of scene. And realistically, she even says it herself that Louis is her favorite, out of the two. And like, kids usually have a favorite parent, which is fine. I mean, like, realistically, let's be real. You want them, because you love them equally. You have multiple kids, but realistically, kids, that's how kids are. They have play favorites. But even again, she says it inside of the story as well. She says, I might have a favorite, but I also, take after Lestat in some kind of way. That's essentially what she says. And the scene where they're at the makeout point and these two couples are essentially going at it, and she's just staring at them. You can tell that, like, her mind is kind of like maturing, and I'm not suggesting that anybody should be watching anybody, but you can see that her mind is kind of like maturing to a certain degree in a certain kind of way, watching them kind of basically get it on. It's kind of, I guess it's like the curious nature again as a child, as she goes to feed on these people, and she begins to feed on them and essentially eats them. One of them, and the lady gets away, but Lestat is able to catch her and basically scolds her about, making sure that both of these people don't get away, and get them practice. If you're gonna kill two people, practice, make sure kill the both of them. And that night essentially transforms her, like I said, it transforms her way of thinking. And it kind of almost, I guess, brings her into the adult mind frame of thinking and gets her to potentially question the things of how she's presenting herself and how she's being presented to the world. And that's reflected even more so when she goes on the night, on a stroll about throughout the night, wearing something a little bit more mature, not too crazy, because this is still at this point this is 1920s. Nothing too crazy, but something more or less with those those like jazz singers kind of like wore back in the day, with the whole those hats, and everybody was all about the hats, and there's a hat like a fur coat. She's dressed very, very fancy, very fancy lady. Now I'm dressing like a preteen girl. And these girls on the side of the street start actually heckling her for this. And right when they're heckling, this is when she meets Charlie. That's when she meets Charlie. Her one and only Charlie. So that's how they talk. It's great. And of course you see the racism there about with these three girls making fun of her. And what basically cuts it is essentially the fact that this our knight in shining armor, essentially horse carriage at all, comes riding up through the streets and gets in between her and basically the fact that she could rip these girls' heads off, calming her down, if whatnot, trying to hide her vampiric nature away from this strange boy who she's now become enchanted with. So now she has a crush. And this is what's happening now. And like from the get-go, I was kind of like, this can only end up bad. Like she has at this point, her mind is maturing. We see the evolution of Claudia to some degree throughout this episode, and she does grow up a little bit. But at this point, she has control over her vampiric powers and her vampiric nature, but she's still a teenager, and the teenagers, when we've all been teens, we have impulses, we have needs, we have things that we can't necessarily, control. It's a very awkward and uncontrollable time. In my mind, I'm thinking like, this can only go badly. And she's smiling up with him, flirting in the room with him, and just so happy, and X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, that boy's gonna die. I'm just like, that boy's gonna die. Yeah, that guy, that guy's not gonna make it. And I mean, we get to it eventually, but he doesn't as I thought correctly. But it was kind of fun to watch her be infatuated with this boy, and being a teenager again through a vampire perspective. You have crushes, you want those crushes to notice you or like you, and etc. Like normal teenage shit, right? Yeah. But yeah, that's I think that's one of the nicer things about the series too. And the scene that was so funny when he like drops the bouquet for her, and she freaks out, and she's like, oh, and she just essentially drops the book that she was like pretending to read, by the way, while he was walking while he was riding his carriage. He's doing his job, riding his carriage under her the balcony there. But that was I thought that was actually really, really, really really funny. And also something like that was a very like domestic was kind of like when to like actually hide her crush, because she's not gonna tell dad, right? She's not gonna tell dad that she has a crush, that she's going on a date, she essentially has a boyfriend. Like she's not gonna go tell her dad that though. She tries to block, because they have telekinesis, and that's something that they share. She tries to block the thoughts of the messages being sent to her dad, or tries to block her mind away from her father, so he wouldn't be able to tell who this boy was, and the fact that she's thinking about this guy, and a very normal domestic thing I think that happens in our world without any vampiric powers. I thought that was a nice little touch, and even Louis was like, are you blocking me right now, Claudia? Claudia, this is your father, answer. That's essentially like, you would see that in a text message. We've seen that in text messages before. We've all gotten that text from mom or dad. It's kind of like, don't you block me. This is your father speaking, this is your mom speaking. Like we've all got those, we've got those messages before, definitely. But yeah, so next scene picks up where essentially Claudia is she's on a date now, and she is having ice cream with this guy, and it kind of goes back to that second episode, right, of pretending to enjoy ice cream or pretending to be human to essentially fit in, where he takes her out for ice cream, they have ice cream, and she barely eats any. And he's kind of like, "What? You don't want any?" And she's like, "No, I have ice cream plenty." And he's kind of like, "Oh, I bet you do." And yeah, and they share this tender moment. He calling her an angel, and her essentially loving it, essentially loving every aspect of everything that's going on. But that impulsive nature, along with hormones and being horny, and etc., comes out, and instead of having self-control, she loses control of her vampiric nature, and like I said, rip, kills that guy, and he essentially doesn't make it, which is so sad. But from a writing perspective, pretty friggin' brilliant. I mean, what more tragic thing can actually happen to you than actually you having your love, or your first love, first crush, first love, essentially from our perspective of how young she is. This is all we know. Her first love or her first crush. I mean, this is her first. You basically are responsible for murdering him because you are not quite understanding what you are, what kind of killing machine you essentially, how much of a killing machine you are, and how little control you essentially have over your own, over your own impulses. And again, as a teenager, you have it's hard enough as a human, but that urge to kill and that uncontrollableness combined with the vampire being a vampire, and going through vampirism is only amplified. And it's realistically saw this coming. I saw it coming. I definitely did. Still brilliant. I kind of almost wanted it to happen because it's brilliant writing, right? They know what they're doing. It's brilliant writing. It's more entertaining. And now we get to the part where Lestat and Louis having difference of parenting styles, and we see the more and more conflict or the more and more divide between the two of them. And because what happens is, like, Claudia goes to Lestat and he's like, "You gotta save him, you gotta turn him, please turn him, you gotta turn him." I don't know, I'm okay with that accent, but not the greatest. But anyway, "You gotta turn him, please." And the Lestat's like, "I cannot. You didn't halfway drain him. You killed him all the way." And that's essentially what it was. She killed him. And once you go past the point, obviously, like, realistically, you can't turn it back. And instead of, like, comforting her and telling her, like, it's gonna be okay, like how Louis was trying to essentially be a little bit more, like, sweeter with her, Lestat was kind of like, "No, now clean up your mess," and kind of like, look what you've done, because they throw him into the incinerator. And what was the line that said that his face melted and his eyes bones turned to ash, or something like that. And the fact that he made her watch, he held her and made her watch in the incinerator, kind of again showed the difference, the contrasting styles of parenting that Louis and Lestat had. Now, my opinion on this is that I don't, because, like, on the first watch, or on the first intake of this, any average, well, I guess for me it was a little bit different, but like any average person, really, I think, would kind of be like, off the cuff, Lestat's a dick. Why would you make her watch this thing? Why would you make her watch this horrifying, mentally scarring thing that will be with her most likely for the rest of her eternity, as she walks the earth as a vampire? But she's a vampire. From a human perspective, that's kind of fucked up, right? Like, you would make the person, like, watch this remind them that they did this and watch them burn in the incinerator when they just want to run away and they don't want to see it. But from the perspective of the vampire, was it the right thing to do to like make her watch and make her remember, to remind her of what she is, that she's a killing machine? And I want you guys to like comment on the video or the audio version of this and let me know what you guys think, because realistically, this might be a hot take, but I think Lestat was right for that. I know he can be a dick, and I've seen the entire series. He's probably a dick later on, and he can be a dick sometimes. He lies and he swerves away from the truth. But realistically, she's a killing machine. She needs to understand that, like, when you kill or she can't hide from the consequences. When you kill, there are consequences. And this is something that even Louis was kind of, having a conversation with her about, and trying to get her to understand that, like, killing has consequences. You can't just go around killing anybody willy-nilly and expect nothing of it. Like, realistically, it has real life consequences behind it, and it has things that you need to deal with, or you will probably have to deal with as they come about after you take somebody's life. And this isn't a game. What you are isn't a game. What you will continue to be isn't something to be taken lightly. You are essentially a killing machine. And you need to understand what that means. And that's what I saw from Lestat, making her watch, making her be present. He could have maybe been a little bit nicer about it, but making her be present in the moment and making her understand that people will die if you don't have control. And you need to have control. This is a gift you got to come back as a second chance, but you have to know. This is a gift that you have, but you have to know and you have to understand that this is dangerous. It can be very, very dangerous if you don't learn to control what you are, a vampire. And that's the lesson he was trying to give to her, because you have to remember, and it's hard, it's easy to forget sometimes that they're not human. They might look like them. They might talk like them, talk with them too. But you have to remember that they're not human. And from a vampiric nature of raising a fledgling vampire, that might have been the right thing to do. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and we'll pick up the conversation there. So as a result, as any teen that's acting out, that's being traumatized, that's being by this, yeah, she's still a 14-year-old girl. She said it's 14. Well, yeah, okay. So and then she said she was turned when she was 19 earlier, but I think it's 14 because that's what she says, like, towards the end. She says, like, being stuck in this 14-year-old girl body. Yeah. So she never ages. So she was actually 19 or 18 when she went on the date, but she looked like she was like younger when she was like 14. So yeah. So as a result, as any teen, as you expect, she indulges in, after going through something very, very traumatic, she indulges in self-harm. She indulges in trying to harm herself, to feel anything but the pain of this emotional distress that she's feeling right now. She just wants to block it all out, so she starts to hurt herself, and the equivalent of cutting. Because even if she did cut herself, it probably hurt for a second, but she's beginning to heal, right? Because she's a vampire. She goes and she has the son do it, and she goes to the sunroom, standing on the piano, and she kind of starts to burn herself. To a degree where she's like, kind of like screaming in pain. I gotta say, the actress, because I heard that she wasn't coming back for the second season. The actress for this that plays Claudia is amazing. And that is truly unfortunate that she's not coming back for the second season. I think that she was amazing in this. This is all about Claudia. This is Claudia's episode 4. I thought that it was, honestly, it was a good episode. It was a good episode overall. It was a fresh take. It was a new perspective. The Lestat and Louis, conflict, Lestat and Louis conflict / contrasting thing, you can only play that out for so long. They needed a fresh new element when that came in through Claudia, and that was awesome. That was really good. It presented a lot of new ideas and a lot of what ifs and like how they would essentially deal with them. So, as always, guys, with every episode of OnReviewCast, that's the episode. Time for Ash's favorite scenes. I don't know. Maybe we'll try something out with a new kind of background music or something. I don't know. Maybe with the voices. Ash's favorite scene. Ash's favorite scenes. Ash's favorite scenes. Ash's favorite scenes. I don't know. Guys, tell me. You tell me which one of those voices sound like the most legit. Anyway, top 3 scenes by Ash, which I thought was amazing. Scene number 1, I think that was actually really cool throughout this was definitely the fact that Claudia is actually the first scene right off the cuff. Claudia's transformation to a vampire. This is our second time throughout the entire series we get to see how vampirism works. We started in the first episode with Louis when they exchanged blood and Lestat essentially bit him. What I am curious about in that episode, though, what was interesting about this is that, and I guess something to think about for later, why didn't Louis do it himself? I guess maybe he didn't know how, and he didn't know how to at this point in his vampire career. But when she first got turned, and how the fact that when we first are introduced to vampire Claudia, this is a female vampire now. We get to see her eyes essentially change the way how Louise did, and her eyes were orange, and that was, I don't know, big and bright, and that was kind of cool to me. But how she thought she was in heaven, and that was when she's like, oh no, they're actually demons. That was just something that again, very innocent, like in her nature and her acting. Her acting that was really good. The second scene from Ash's favorite scenes, I think, has got to be the kill of the two the two lovers on the makeout point, or whatever you have them. Whatever you have, say, I don't know, I forget what he called it, but the kill on top of that hill where everybody was basically fucking making out. That was pretty cool because we got to see Claudia and Lestat, which I kind of felt that, and she even said it herself, like Louis and her got along better than Lestat and Claudia did. And we actually got to see a rare time of them actually kind of like bonding. So that was really cool. And then my final scene, I think that I really liked was towards the end where Claudia kills Charlie. And that scene was iconic for me, I think, was because, you know, this scene was the turning point where she kind of lost her innocence. This scene was where it all kind of came together, and she, in the moment of love, she loses control, and it was so well done to where she thinks that, okay, like he's dead. Well, she sees that he's dead now, and she's kind of like calling out for him. He doesn't respond, doesn't do anything, and he's dead. And in the aftermath of it is that she begs Lestat to turn him, but it's too late. He's already dead. And you can see her throughout those, couple of minutes, lose her innocence. And that's when she starts to, I guess we can kind of see psychologically her mind maturing rather than that of, just her mind body, rather than that of her entire being, maturing as well. I guess something changes from that point on. And it's only a few minutes left, like within the episode, but definitely changes from that point on. She as a person cracks, changes, and she grows up a little bit. But yeah, definitely that was Ash's favorite scene. Ash's favorite scenes. So Linda, let's get the on review score for episode 4 for Interview with a Vampire.
On Review, Interview with a Vampire Episode 4 receives a 5 out of 5.
There you have it, guys. Another beautiful episode of OnReviewCast, another beautiful episode of Interview with a Vampire. Let us know what you think about the episode. Hit us up on our socials on the Instagram, Facebook, and the Twitter. And let us know, what you actually think of the actual OnReviewCast episode as well. Lastly, guys, don't forget, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.